The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the alien landscape. The planet, known for its stunning beauty and mysterious origins, had been the focus of human exploration for years. Yet, despite all the technology and knowledge the humans had gathered, one mystery remained: the alien woman. She was a creature of legend, known to only a few and shrouded in an aura of untouchable power. Her species, unlike any other in the galaxy, carried a unique and dangerous gift: the power of the touch. The human, Mark Evans, had heard stories of the alien woman before. He had read reports and heard whispers from his fellow explorers about the forbidden nature of her kind. Mark was no stranger to danger. As a seasoned diplomat for the Galactic Union, he had negotiated peace treaties, explored unknown worlds, and encountered beings from across the universe. But nothing in his career had prepared him for meeting her, the alien woman who had lived for centuries, isolated and alone, with only her thoughts and her powers for company. Today was different, however. Mark had been chosen to accompany a small group of diplomats to the planet where the alien woman resided. It was an important mission, one that could lead to new alliances and untold discoveries. But Mark's real task was much more personal. He had been assigned to meet her, to understand the truth behind the stories. Could a species truly be so powerful, so afraid of their own touch that they lived in isolation? As Mark and his team approached the settlement where she lived, the landscape seemed to change. The air grew thicker, almost as if it held secrets. They stepped out of their ship, the soft hum of the engines fading as they walked on the soft, mossy ground. Their guide, an alien of a different species, gestured toward a large open area ahead. Her dwelling is just beyond this forest. You must be cautious, the guide said, his voice calm but tinged with a hint of fear. Mark nodded, trying to ignore the apprehension that grew inside him. He had heard the warnings, the whispers. No one dared touch her, not even other members of her species. A touch was said to cause great harm, perhaps even death, both to the one who touched and the one who was touched. Yet here he was about to meet her, to stand in the same space as the one who had lived for so long in solitude, untouched and unbothered by the world around her. The path through the forest was quiet, with only the sound of footsteps and the occasional call of an unseen creature. The trees were tall and dark, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something they could never have. The deeper they walked, the more Mark felt the tension building in the air. It was as if the very atmosphere around him was alive, pressing in on him, warning him. Finally, they reached a clearing, and there she stood. The alien woman was unlike anything Mark had ever seen. She was tall, with smooth, pale blue skin that shimmered in the dim light. Her long, flowing hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall, a deep shade of crimson that seemed to glow in the shadowed clearing. Her eyes were the color of the sky at dawn, vast and endless, filled with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through him. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. She was beautiful, in a way that words could not describe. Her presence alone seemed to command the space around her, as though everything else in the universe had paused just to observe her. But it wasn't just her beauty that struck Mark. It was the power she radiated. She was not like the peaceful, welcoming aliens Mark had encountered in the past. No, she was something far more ancient, far more dangerous. She turned her head toward him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. Mark stood frozen, unable to speak at first. This was the moment he had been trained for, the moment that could define the future of intergalactic relations. But all he could do was stare at her, mesmerized by her presence. Human. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of centuries. You come with questions, but know this: there are things you do not understand. Do not think to touch me. Her words were not a command, but a warning. Mark felt the weight of her gaze and understood the gravity of the situation. He had read about her species' taboo against physical touch. She was forbidden to touch anyone, not even another member of her own kind. It was a law ingrained in their society, passed down through generations. The power they possessed, when unleashed, could bring about destruction. "I understand," Mark said, his voice steady, though he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "I've heard the stories. I am not here to disrespect your people or your customs." The alien woman studied him for a moment longer before nodding slightly. "Then proceed with caution, human. There is a reason I live alone." Mark wanted to ask her more, to know why her people had chosen such a life of isolation, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. He had never felt so uncertain, so small, in the face of another being. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of danger, there was something else, something deeper, an unspoken connection that he couldn't explain. As they stood there, the tension between them palpable, Mark couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if he were to defy her warning? What if the rules were not as absolute as they seemed? But the thought was fleeting. He was here to observe, not to act recklessly. He was a diplomat, not a fool. And yet, something in him stirred, a curiosity that he couldn't ignore. For now, he would respect her boundaries. But deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning of something far greater. The days following Mark's first meeting with the alien woman were filled with uncertainty. It was hard for him to focus on anything other than the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. He had been briefed on the importance of keeping a distance, respecting the alien woman's boundaries, and never, under any circumstances, touching her. The rules were clear, yet something about the woman, something beyond her beauty and the mystery of her people, seemed to draw him in. Mark spent his time studying the reports, but the deeper he read, the more questions he had. His thoughts kept drifting back to her eyes, her calm voice, and the weight of the warning she had given him. There was something she had said that lingered in his mind. "There is a reason I live alone." It wasn't just her words that had left an impact, but the way she had said it. It was as if she had been carrying a burden for centuries, a burden that no one could ever understand. The evening after their meeting, Mark found himself alone in his quarters. He stared out of the window, watching the strange alien sky shift colors. The planet's 2 moons were visible, their pale light casting a soft glow across the landscape. Mark felt a sense of loneliness wash over him. He had always been able to connect with people, to form bonds, even with those who came from worlds far different from Earth. But with her, it was different. She was closed off, an enigma that he couldn't solve. The next day, Mark was called to meet with the alien woman once again. The tension in the air was thicker this time, as though the very planet itself could feel the weight of the encounter. As he walked to the place where they had met the first time, Mark's thoughts raced. He had so many questions, so many things he needed to know. But would she answer them? Or would she push him away, as she had done with so many others before him? When he arrived at the clearing, she was already there. Her presence seemed to fill the space, even though she stood perfectly still. The soft rustle of the alien leaves in the wind was the only sound that accompanied the moment. Mark could feel the air around her shift, as if it responded to her. "Human," she said, her voice as calm and steady as before. "You've come again. I must warn you, my kind have been isolated for a reason. A touch is forbidden for us. You cannot understand it, but we are not like other beings. Touching another is dangerous. It is not just a matter of breaking a rule. It is a matter of survival." Mark took a step forward, trying to remain calm, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I understand. But I must ask, why? Why are you forbidden to touch?" She turned her head slightly, her deep blue eyes studying him. "It is not something we choose. It is a part of us, something we cannot change. Our touch, it affects others in ways that cannot be controlled. It brings harm, not just to others, but to us as well. That is why I live alone. I have been alone for centuries, unable to truly connect with anyone." Mark's heart ached as he listened to her. Her words were filled with sorrow, a deep sadness that spoke of a life spent in isolation. He could sense the weight of her centuries of loneliness, the longing that she had buried deep within herself. There was a part of him that wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew better. The rules were clear, and breaking them could bring disaster. "Is there no way to break this curse?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, her expression unreadable. "It is not a curse, human. It is simply our nature. We are born this way, and we live with it for as long as we breathe." Mark could see the pain in her eyes, the way she held herself back from everything and everyone. Had never met anyone like her. There was something both beautiful and tragic about her existence. The more he learned, the more he understood that this was not just about a physical touch. This was about a lifetime of fear, isolation, and sacrifice. "Then, you have never felt the warmth of another's touch?" Mark asked softly, his voice tinged with sympathy. The alien woman's gaze flickered for just a moment, a fleeting expression that Mark couldn't quite decipher. "No, we are forbidden, not just by law, but by our very nature. A single touch could change everything. It could bring us closer to death than to life." Mark felt a pang in his chest. He couldn't imagine living a life like that, never being able to experience the simple, comforting connection that came with touch. It seemed impossible. Yet here she was, standing before him, stronger and more powerful than any being he had ever met, yet carrying the weight of a life without touch. "Is there no hope?" Mark asked, unable to keep the frustration from his voice. "No way for you to be free from this burden?" She was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant. "Perhaps there is. But no one has dared to find out. And even if there is, I am not sure I am ready to face it." Mark felt a surge of determination. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. If there was a way to help her, he would find it. But he also knew that breaking the taboo of her people was not something to be taken lightly. It would be dangerous, and the consequences could be beyond what he could imagine. "Then I will help you," he said, his voice firm. "If there's a way to free you from this, I'll find it." The alien woman's gaze softened for a moment, and Mark could see a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You do not understand the risks. You cannot know what you are asking." "I may not understand everything about your people," Mark replied, "but I do understand one thing. You don't have to be alone anymore." For the first time, the alien woman looked at him, not with suspicion or fear, but with a faint glimmer of something else, something that almost resembled hope. It was a feeling that Mark had never expected to see from her. It gave him the courage to press on, to find a way to break the unbreakable taboo, and to do what no one else had ever dared to do before. The next few days were filled with a growing sense of unease. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a fine line. Each encounter with the alien woman only seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding her existence. They met several times after their first conversation, each time exchanging words, but never touching. Mark respected her boundaries, even as his curiosity about her grew stronger. Yet there was always something unspoken between them, an unexplainable connection that neither of them could ignore. The more they talked, the more Mark saw beyond her role as a forbidden figure. She wasn't just the mysterious, untouchable alien woman. She was a person with her own struggles and desires. Her isolation, her power, and her vulnerability all seemed to collide in a way that Mark had never experienced before. But the danger of her touch was always there. She had warned him more than once. A touch could bring harm to both of them. It wasn't just a matter of breaking some rule. It was a matter of life and death. Still, the thought of what might be, of what they could share if that barrier could be broken, lingered in Mark's mind. He had tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the mission at hand. But every time he saw her, he couldn't help but feel the pull, a desire to reach out, to connect with her in ways that went beyond words. One evening, after another long day of meetings with the alien leaders, Mark found himself walking alone through the forest that surrounded the alien settlement. It was an unusually quiet night, with only the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the distant calls of strange creatures breaking the silence. The two moons of the planet hung overhead, casting a dim, calming light across the land. The air was cool, and Mark could feel the tension of the past few days pressing on him. He had needed some time to think, to clear his head. The isolation of the forest, the quiet peace, helped him think clearly. But as he walked, his thoughts inevitably turned to her, the alien woman. He hadn't meant to visit her, but something inside him urged him to go back to her, to see her again. His curiosity and his growing feelings had become too strong to ignore. Without realizing it, he found himself standing at the edge of the clearing where they had first met. The alien woman was there, standing beneath the trees, as still and calm as ever. She seemed to be waiting for something, though Mark couldn't tell what. Her deep blue eyes met his as he stepped into the clearing. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Human," she said softly, her voice as steady as the breeze, but Mark could sense the slight tension beneath her words. "Why do you come again? You know the danger." "I had to see you," Mark replied, his voice quieter than he expected. "I can't stop thinking about what you said. You don't have to be alone." She studied him for a long time, her gaze piercing, as if searching for something within him. "You do not understand the weight of my words," she said. "A touch is not just forbidden. It is dangerous. It could destroy everything." Mark took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't care about the rules. I care about what's right. You don't have to live in isolation forever. I don't want to see you suffer." Her eyes softened just a little, but she didn't say anything. The silence between them grew thick, and Mark felt a sense of urgency rise within him. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there, watching her suffer in silence. "I know you're afraid," Mark said, stepping a little closer, though he kept his distance. "But I think there's another way. I believe there's a way for us to connect without causing harm. I'm willing to try if you are." She stepped back slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You do not know what you are asking. You cannot change the nature of my kind. You cannot change centuries of history." "I don't know everything," Mark admitted, "but I believe that sometimes change begins with a single act of courage." Her expression remained unreadable, but Mark saw something flicker in her eyes, something like doubt, something like hope. It was as if she was beginning to wonder if there could be another way, another path that didn't involve endless loneliness. Then suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble shook the trees, and Mark's attention snapped to the horizon, where a storm seemed to be gathering. The alien woman stiffened, her eyes scanning the darkening sky. "What's happening?" Mark asked, his voice tense as the wind began to pick up. "It is a sign," she said, her voice trained. "A warning." Before Mark could ask anything more, the tremor grew stronger, and the ground cracked beneath their feet. Mark reached out instinctively, his hand grazing the alien woman's arm in the chaos. The moment their skin touched, the world around them seemed to stop. The storm calmed, and the rumbling faded away. But the air between them felt thick, charged with something Mark couldn't explain. The alien woman gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Her body stiffened, and she pulled away quickly, staring at her arm where his hand had made contact. Mark's heart raced, and he was unsure what to do. Had he just broken the rule? Had he caused something terrible to happen? The alien woman took several steps back, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark stood frozen, his mind racing. "I didn't mean to. You've touched me," she said, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen." But even as she spoke, Mark could see a change in her. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something like relief, or perhaps even desire. It was brief, but it was there. And Mark knew, in that moment, that their worlds had just collided in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The moment Mark touched her, time seemed to slow down. The world around them went silent, the rumbling of the earth fading into nothing. The alien woman, who had always maintained an air of unshakable control, now stood frozen, her eyes wide with surprise. Mark's heart raced as he watched her pull away from him, her breath coming in shallow, quick bursts. He stood there, still reeling from the moment that had just occurred. He hadn't meant to break the taboo, but in the heat of the moment, it had felt so natural, so necessary to reach out and protect her. And now, standing apart from her, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The alien woman's gaze shifted from her arm to his eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mark wanted to apologize, to say something, anything, to break the tension, but his words felt stuck in his throat. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily between them, like a barrier that neither of them knew how to cross. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You touched me." Mark swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." The ground shook, and "You've broken the rule," she interrupted, her voice trembling, though her eyes softened just a little. "I told you that my people are forbidden to touch. You cannot imagine the consequences." Mark took a step closer, his heart pounding. He needed to understand. He couldn't let this moment end like this, with them both standing in silence, unsure of what had just happened. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Mark said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "But what I felt, when I touched you, something was different. I don't know how to explain it." The alien woman's eyes flickered, and for the first time, Mark saw something more than just cold detachment. There was a hint of vulnerability in her gaze, something that had been hidden behind her stoic exterior all this time. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quieter now. "You don't know what you've done, human. The touch of my kind is not just physical. It is something more. It can change things in ways you cannot predict." Mark's curiosity grew. "What do you mean? What happens if you touch someone?" Her eyes darkened, and she looked away, as if the weight of her past was too heavy to carry any longer. "It is said that our touch can bring great destruction. It's not just about causing harm to the person we touch. It's about the way it affects us. It creates a bond, one that is powerful, uncontrollable. It can break us." Mark's mind raced as he tried to make sense of her words. But what if the bond is something good? What if it's not destructive? She shook her head, her expression pained. "You don't understand. My people have lived in isolation for centuries because we are afraid of this bond. Our touch is dangerous because it creates a connection we cannot undo. A connection that will change everything." Mark's heart sank as he realized the gravity of what she was saying. The alien woman wasn't just afraid of being touched. She was afraid of what that touch could unleash. And for her, the consequences were not just personal. They were tied to the very fabric of her existence. "I'm not afraid," Mark said softly, stepping closer, his voice gentle. "I don't think you need to be either. If the connection is real, if it's something deeper than just touch, then maybe it's something worth exploring." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of doubt and curiosity. "You don't know what you're asking. If we allow this bond to form, it could change everything. It could destroy everything." "But what if it doesn't?" Mark asked. "What if it brings something new? Something better?" She took a step back, her expression clouded with uncertainty. "You cannot understand. We have lived like this for so long because we were told it was the only way. Our people have always feared the consequences of touch, of connection. But now, you've forced me to question everything." Mark's heart swelled with a mix of hope and frustration. He could see that she was struggling with the same emotions he was. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear that kept her locked away from everyone, including herself. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight," Mark said, his voice soft but firm. "But I think there's a chance for something more, a chance for both of us. We don't have to live in fear anymore." The alien woman remained silent for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Mark watched her closely, trying to gauge what she was thinking, but her expression was unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "What if I can never go back? What if I lose myself in this connection, in this bond?" Mark took a deep breath. Then we'll face it together. We don't have to do this alone." She met his gaze, her eyes softening for the first time since they'd met. It was a brief moment, but it was enough. Mark felt a shift in the air between them, a subtle change that told him they had crossed an invisible line, one that could never be uncrossed. For the first time, the alien woman didn't look at him with fear or distrust. She looked at him with something else, something more. And Mark knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed their unexpected moment of contact were filled with silence. The alien woman, whose name Mark had learned was Lyra, kept her distance from him, as if the touch had shaken something deep inside her. Mark, too, felt a strange shift within himself. He had always believed in logic, in reason, in understanding the world around him. But with Lyra, nothing seemed to make sense. The connection that had formed between them was like nothing he had ever experienced before. He spent most of his time reflecting on what had happened, thinking about the words she had said. Lyra's fear of the bond was real, and he could see it in the way she moved, the way she avoided his gaze. She was struggling, torn between the centuries of isolation that had shaped her and the new feelings she was starting to recognize within herself. Mark couldn't help but feel frustrated. He had come to this planet to help, to bridge the gap between two worlds, and yet he felt as though he was only making things more complicated. The more he tried to understand Lyra, the more he realized that there was so much about her and her people that he would never fully grasp. Her species, her culture, and her deep-rooted fears were beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet despite all of that, he couldn't deny what was growing between them. As the days passed, Mark found himself drawn to her more and more. He would catch glimpses of her when he least expected it, standing in the clearing, her silhouette framed by the pale light of the moons. Every time he saw her, his heart would race, a mixture of excitement and fear filling his chest. The touch had changed everything, and he knew that there was no going back. One evening, after a long day spent discussing diplomacy with the alien leaders, Mark found himself walking toward the forest once again. His mind was filled with questions, and he needed answers. He couldn't ignore the connection any longer, couldn't pretend that it wasn't real. He had to know what it meant for him, for Lyra, and for their future. When he arrived at the clearing, Lyra was already there, standing in the same spot where they had first met. Her back was straight, her head held high, as if she was trying to maintain some sense of control over herself. But Mark could see the way her shoulders were tense, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, as if she was unsure of what to do next. "Lyra," Mark called softly, his voice carrying through the stillness of the night. "We need to talk." She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of something like worry, beneath the surface. "About what happened," Mark said, taking a step forward. "About the touch. I know it scared you. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did, and I can't stop thinking about it." Lyra's eyes flickered with something Mark couldn't read. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to speak. "You don't understand. My people have been taught for generations that touch is dangerous. We have lived in isolation because of it. We have been told that it can destroy us. And now I forced you to face something you've been avoiding for centuries." Mark finished for her, his voice softer now. "I know. But Lyra, I don't think it has to be like this. I don't think the bond we're creating is something to be afraid of." Lyra shook her head, her eyes distant. "You don't know that. You don't know what could happen if we allowed this bond to grow. It could tear us apart. It could destroy everything." Mark reached out, but stopped himself just short of touching her. He had learned his lesson about respecting her boundaries. Maybe. But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe we can control it, together. She met his gaze then, her eyes searching his, as if trying to find something in him, something that would convince her that this was the right thing to do. For a moment, the silence stretched between them, filled only with the distant sounds of the forest. "I don't want to be alone anymore," Lyra said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm afraid of what it means to let someone in. To let you in." Mark's heart clenched at her words. He could hear the fear in her voice, the deep-seated loneliness that she had carried with her for so long. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was fear of something much deeper, something she had been running from for centuries. "I'm not asking you to let me in all at once," Mark said gently. "I'm asking you to take this one step at a time. We don't have to rush into anything, but we can't keep pretending that nothing has changed. The bond is there, whether we acknowledge it or not." Lyra's gaze softened, just slightly, as she looked at him. For a moment, it seemed as though she might say something more, but then she looked away, her expression clouded with uncertainty. "Mark," she said, her voice steady again, "I don't know what this will mean for us, for me, but I do know that what we have, this connection, it's not something I can easily ignore." Mark nodded. "I understand, and I'm willing to take things slowly, to let you decide how we move forward. But whatever happens, we're in this together. I'll help you, Lyra. You don't have to be afraid." There was a long pause, and for the first time, Lyra seemed to relax, just a little. It was as if the weight she had been carrying for so long had shifted, if only for a moment. She stepped closer to him, and Mark could feel the tension in her body slowly melting away. "I don't know what will happen next," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I'm willing to see where this goes, together." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be challenges they couldn't predict. But in that moment, standing in the quiet clearing with Lyra, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after their quiet conversation in the clearing were filled with tension. Mark and Lyra had agreed to take things slowly, but the weight of their unspoken bond lingered in the air between them. Mark could feel it. Every time they spoke, every time their eyes met, there was a sense of something greater, something unknown, just beneath the surface. The connection between them was undeniable, but the question was no longer just about whether they should allow it to grow. It was about what it would mean for both of them. Lyra, for her part, seemed torn. She had always kept herself at a distance, living in isolation for reasons that went far beyond fear. But now, with Mark in her life, something was different. She had admitted, even if just briefly, that she didn't want to be alone anymore. Yet the deep-rooted belief that their bond could be dangerous still haunted her. She couldn't escape the warnings of her people, the centuries of isolation, the belief that their touch could lead to destruction. Mark spent his days trying to understand her, to help her, to show her that there was a different path forward. But no matter how much he wanted to believe that they could make this work, he knew that he wasn't the only one with doubts. Lyra's fear was real, and it ran deep. Every time they spoke, he could see it in her eyes. The battle between the part of her that wanted to embrace the connection and the part that feared it. One evening, Mark found himself once again standing in the clearing where they had met. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the land. The air was cooler than usual, the breeze carrying a hint of something ancient, something that Mark couldn't quite explain. He wasn't sure why he had come here again, but he had to admit that he was hoping to see Lyra. There was still so much between them, so much left unsaid. And with every passing moment, it felt like the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. As he stood there, waiting, he couldn't help but feel that something was about to change. There was an energy in the air, something that felt different from anything he had experienced before. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the two of them would finally face what had been building between them. Then he saw her. Lyra appeared from the shadows of the trees, her figure outlined against the fading light. She walked toward him with her usual grace, her movements fluid, but there was something about her tonight that was different. There was an intensity in her eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. She didn't speak at first, but Mark could see that she was deep in thought, as if she were preparing to say something important. "Mark," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking." Mark felt his heart race at the seriousness in her tone. "About what?" "About what I said before. About the connection between us," she continued, her gaze never leaving his. "I've spent so long running from it, from the idea of what it might mean, because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I let someone in. Afraid of what our touch could bring." Mark stepped closer, his voice soft. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Lyra. I'm here. We'll figure this out together." Lyra shook her head, but not in disagreement. It was more as if she was trying to push away the weight of everything she had carried for so long. "I've always lived by the rules of my people, Mark. I've always kept myself at a distance because I was told it was the only way. But now I see that there's more to it than just fear. There's something else, something deeper." Mark didn't speak, but his heart was filled with a quiet hope. He knew that Lyra was struggling, but this was the first time he had heard her speak about their connection without fear. There was something else in her voice now, something like acceptance. "I don't know what this bond means," she continued, her voice growing softer. "But I can feel it. I can feel it in every moment we share, and I've come to realize that maybe I don't have to be afraid anymore." Mark's breath caught in his throat as Lyra stepped closer to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something both fragile and powerful. For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if she was looking for something. Some sign, some answer to the question she had been asking herself for so long. Mark didn't push her, knowing that the decision she faced wasn't one that could be made quickly. It would take time, and it would take trust. "I don't know what the future holds," Lyra said at last, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't know what this bond means for us, for me, for my people. But I know that I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to be alone." Mark's heart swelled with relief and hope. He knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, it felt like they had taken the first step towards something new, something uncertain but full of possibility. "We'll take it one step at a time," Mark said softly. "No rush, no pressure. Just us, figuring it out together." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "Together," she repeated, as though the word itself carried more weight than it ever had before. They stood there for a while longer, side by side, hands still lightly touching, each lost in their own thoughts. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful, filled with a sense of mutual understanding that had taken root between them. As the night deepened, the stars overhead seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was giving its blessing. Mark didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. He didn't feel like an outsider in Lyra's world. He felt like a part of it, a part of her. "Mark," Lyra said after a while, her voice soft but full of meaning. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me that there's another way." Mark smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what felt right." She smiled then, a small, hesitant smile, but one that reached her eyes. It was the first time he had seen her smile like that, without fear, without the burden of her past weighing her down. And in that moment, Mark knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. There would be struggles, there would be uncertainty, but they had taken the first step into a future where they were no longer bound by fear. They were free to explore the connection they shared, to build something new, something beautiful. For the first time, Lyra looked at him not as a stranger, but as someone she could trust, someone she could share her world with, and in return, someone who would help her navigate a path she had always feared. And with that, the first chapter of their new journey began, not in a rush, but in a quiet, steady understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together.